Welcome to another episode of Counter Apologetics. Today we're going to be looking at a video from Pints with Aquinas. They had Trent Horn on to discuss the problem of violence in the Old Testament. We're going to take a look at this video, see what they have to say. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot with a smaller channel like this. Without further ado, let's get into it.
What about the slaughtering of the Canaanites by the Israelites? Can you explain that problem and show us how you might respond to that?
Yeah, so this is the problem of Old Testament violence. And I think for many people, it is case closed when it comes to the Bible. Like, I can't be a Christian if you worship Yahweh. And he ordered the Israelites to kill not just the army of another group, not just the Canaanite army, but to lay waste to other, to the non-combatants involved, to the women and to the children. And so how could God order something like this? That shows that he's evil. He's bloodthirsty.
Yes.
I want to have nothing to do with a God like that. And so how could you worship it?
That's a pretty fair assessment. That's a good question. It's a question that I would have. Even if you could somehow demonstrate that this God does exist, why would you choose to follow him? What reason do you have to just excuse the atrocities that he's committed throughout the entirety of the Old Testament? It's a good question. I'm curious to see what the responses are going to be.
God like that. And Christians have offered a variety of responses to this argument. I don't endorse every response present, but I think it's important for people, especially an atheist who is working through this, to be aware of the different responses.
Yeah.
So
I don't know why it'd be especially important for an atheist to work through these different responses. And I also don't know why you would give responses that you yourself are admitting are not very good. But okay, let's keep going.
On the one end, the extreme, or not extreme, I guess, one response might be that, this is just something that is a purely human device that represents the barbarism of ancient peoples and that was not inspired by.
That's not a response. That's accurate. What he just said was true. This represents the barbarism of the time. The problem comes in when you say that these commands were from some divine entity. That's the issue here. That's the only issue here with the Old Testament. All of the Old Testament makes a whole lot of sense when you remove God from it. But that's not what's being proposed by Christians and Jews nonetheless. That's not being proposed. You can't just, if you take God out of it, then yeah, sure, that's easy. The complicated part of this is fitting God into it. But let's keep going.
By God never did anything like this whatsoever. And so that's just a part of the Bible that we determine is not relevant today. And it was, it's an error within the Bible. And so it's something that,
That's a lot of errors. That's a lot of errors. There was a lot of commands from God to his people to commit absolute atrocities. And not just with the Canaanites. You have the Moabites or the Moabites and the Amalekites and the Midianites. And, there was that one time that God himself committed one of the largest genocides of all time. If not the largest. Probably the largest. Nope, God did the largest genocide of all time when he flooded the entire earth, killing men, women, infants, children, elderly, puppies, kittens, Bambi, everybody died, except for the Noah and his ilk. But let's keep going.
We don't accept everything, but that's just an error. That's one view. It's not a view that I would endorse, but those who say this, I would say, like you said before, what does that prove? It doesn't prove that it doesn't prove Jesus never rose from the dead. It doesn't prove God doesn't exist. It doesn't prove God never revealed.
Sure. Okay. It does, in a sense, prove that this God doesn't exist. And it does, in some sense, prove that Jesus did not rise from the dead. Because you, as a Christian, have to make an all-loving God and an atrocity-committing God. You have to make those make sense. And if you get rid of one or the other, your entire religion crumbles. You can't say if you say that this God did not commit these atrocities, then what you're essentially saying is that the Bible isn't true. And if the Bible isn't true, well, you can imagine what kind of problems that might create for your religion. Whereas if you say he did commit these atrocities, you're also saying that somehow an all-loving God committed absolute atrocities and genocides, which kind of makes him not this all-loving God that you claim he is, that you claim Jesus is. So if God is not an all-loving God, Jesus is not an all-loving Jesus, therefore an atrocity committing all-loving God probably, most certainly, definitely doesn't exist. So in a sense, it does kind of demonstrate the non-existence of the atrocity committing all-loving God. Yes. Let's keep going.
Himself. So at best, if you were, I mean, I know Christian theologians who hold a view like this. This is just an erroneous part of the Bible. And yet they're Christians. They believe Jesus is fully divine. And so that could be a live option for that atheist, especially if you're firmly committed to believing in the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
I would rather you believe in Jesus and you're trying to develop your biblical theology than to just throw the whole thing out.
Great point.
But as I said, that's not a view that that I would endorse. But
That's not a great point. He said great point. That's not a great point. Trent has yet to make a great point, and essentially he's admitting himself that he's not making any great points, which is why I'm curious why we're waiting. There's not many options you have when you're trying to do genocide defense, when you're trying to justify atrocities. There's not a whole lot you can say, so I guess you do have to have some filler, but it was not a great point.
I think it's one that could be on the table, and for some people they may accept that. Another view, and this would be the view that St. Thomas Aquinas takes, is a view that says that God has the right to take life. And so if God has the right to take my life or your life, then he also has the right to deputize others he has the right to choose different methods to take human life. And so he's trying to show, in exercising
So first off, it's stupid. This is a very dumb excuse to justify genocide. Even if somehow, some way true, why would you then choose to, okay, let's say that God does have a divine right. Just forget all of the legwork and heavy lifting it takes to make all that make sense. Let's just grant it. God has the right to take life. Now the question becomes, why would you choose to follow a God who chooses to utilize very freely his right to take said life? Why would you? So he does have the right, but that doesn't mean that you ought do it. And God did it. He did it a lot. So again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You have an all-loving God, an omnibenevolent God who has some divine right to take life and some divine right to deputize humans to take life when he could just do the taking of the life himself. But it gets very, the water starts to get very muddy very, very quickly. But why would you choose to then be like, okay, so this God has the right to take life, and he chooses to take the life of babies through acts of complete barbarism? Why would you then choose to follow that God who commands the slaughter of children through horrific means, spears, swords, to put the children to the sword? Now, why are you choosing to worship this all-loving, divinely right taking of life through the sword God? If you can make that make sense. But let's keep
judgment
going.
Against this group of people, that just as God would.
And real quick, I'm assuming all of this, everything he's saying, I'm gonna guess doesn't. No matter what apologetic he gives, he then has to couple this with the all-loving aspect of this God. So far, he has yet to do that via, well, I guess so I guess the first one might skirt around that little dilemma, because you're saying that, well, the Bible's not true, but that creates its own separate set of problems. The second one, saying God has the right to take a life, you still have to couple that with an all-loving aspect. And no matter what apologetic you give, you do have to still make that make sense, or get rid of the omnibenevolent aspect of this God you're choosing to fight for.
Exercise judgment against nations, against Egypt, against other nations that had plagues. The plagues probably killed men, women, and children as well. And God used microbes to do it. He used small microbial soldiers to kill men, women, and children. And it possibly may have been
Small
more
microbial
suffering
soldiers.
from a plague than from being killed by an
Yeah, so he's getting it, but he's not getting it. He's saying it might have caused more suffering, additional suffering. So you can argue he's adding more numbers to this equation. He's adding, so not only is he saying that in some ways God has the divine right to take a life, the divine right to deputize somebody to take a life, but also the divine right to take a life via suffering. Now you have a lot of extra work to do. This might somehow make some sense, sort of, if you say, okay, God has a right to take a life, he could just snap you out of existence. But now he's saying God has some divine right to inflict suffering upon you, an innocent child. You got to make it make sense. You got to make this make sense, and you're not doing it, buddy.
by a soldier,
Okay.
So, I mean,
Okay.
it's still a difficult and terrible thing, but God chose to end these people's lives and have a judgment against their
It's a difficult and terrible thing, he says, as he goes on to explain why God has the right to do it.
civilizations because of the
Okay,
great
we get it. Subscribe. You know what? This big yellow banner that's going across the screen here. Good. Why are you? It's popped up like 15 times now. I'm using this as so I'm not going to add any subscribe banners into my video, because just pretend that this one, pretend that's mine. This is my subscribe banner. So every time you see this, just that's me asking you to subscribe. He's doing it enough for both of us. I'm stealing his.
depravity of evil they engaged in. I think that in the book of Genesis, I think it's Genesis 15, God prophesies to Abraham that his people, his descendants, will be kept in bondage in a land that's not their own, referring to the Exodus, and that it will take 400 years before the land vomits out the Canaanites, to wait till their iniquity grows to
Someone's coming to the door.
to fullness. Wonderful.
Oh, it's Amazon, but they left. Again, the benefits of having a home studio.
It's the lost Canaanite coming in here to have his say,
Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so that
The host is so bored with Trent Horn right now that he stopped the video. He interrupted his own video to look at an Amazon driver, and then chose to keep it in the video. I understand.
Idea here
I
is
get it.
talking about the Amorites in that instance, Genesis 15, that 400 years will pass until they're vomited from the land.
What is he talking about?
Until their iniquity grows to, they've reached their maximum level of sinfulness, child sacrifice by fire, things like this they were engaged in. And so if God is allowed to take human life, and he's allowed to use various methods to do that, then doesn't
Suffering. You can fancy that. You can dress that language up by saying various methods, but what he actually said was God has the right to inflict any amount of suffering to end said life. God has the right to inflict suffering upon a child before and resulting in the child's death. This is what he's arguing right now. I don't know if he's subscribing to this method, this apologetic, or not, but he's certainly laying it out, and it's really, really bad. It makes your God sound like the monster that he is, in fact. Yes.
he have that right as the author of human life.
No.
And so that is another option that can be taken that's
No.
historical.
No creator of any creation has the right, the divine right, to inflict any amount of suffering he wants to upon his creation. You don't. You just don't.
Another option that we could take is to say,
And real quick, even if you do somehow have that divine right to choose to utilize that option, makes you not an omnibenevolent force. So that's out.
that these passages in the Old Testament do not literally describe actual killing of non-combatants, that these are what you would call exaggerated warfare.
Okay. Well, Um, the word infant is specifically used. So unless you're saying there were infant soldiers, there might have been child soldiers. But unless you're saying that there were infant soldiers, no, it's very specific in what it says. It says very with laser precision choice of words to kill the infants. So I don't know. The rhetoric is
that they
really
don't actually
stupid.
narrate these events happening, that they were written centuries later during the United Kingdom of Israel. And the purpose of these passages, leave none that breathe, slay man, woman, and child.
An infant.
The purpose of these passages is to underscore for the people of Israel at that time, which was long after the Canaanites, is to have nothing to do with pagan influences. Now, some will say, well, look, you're just coming with that because you can't stomach the literal sense. So you have to make this up to make yourself feel better. I don't think that's the case, because when you read the actual biblical text.
But when you have a God who is fully willing to level cities and all of its inhabitants, who is fully willing to drown babies and puppies through unimaginable suffering, because you got to remember the flood, the flood waters, animals can swim, right? It's not like they just died instantly. They would have had to have tried to struggle through fatigue torture, until they finally succumb to their tiredness and then drown. And these are puppies and dogs and kittens and babies and women and infants, and the whole gambit. If you have a God who's willing to do all of this, why is it such a far reach that he just commanded his people to kill all of the... He did it himself. Why is it so unimaginable that he would command others to do it in his stead? Why?
I believe you can arrive at this conclusion that many of these passages, you find them in books like the book of Joshua. And the book of Joshua has a lot of warfare rhetoric. It's about the conquering of the promised land. But then when you go into books like the book of Judges,
what about Numbers?
You get a very different story about the Amalekites and the Canaanites. They're not completely destroyed. They hound Israel for a very long time.
Okay, so he's already changed what he starts. First he said it's just rhetoric, that they didn't actually do these things. They were just written down as if they did them. Now he's changing it around to saying it wasn't as bad as the Bible describes it, which in my opinion, it doesn't matter. Just because you did not succeed in your genocide does not make your genocide attempt irrelevant, or that you did not... Just because you didn't succeed in your genocide doesn't mean you didn't commit one. This is a terrible, terrible defense. Terrible defense. This is the best that we can do.
And rather, their religious shrines are torn down and they're driven from the land. They're vomited out of the land. So it's really more of a matter of typical ancient Near Eastern warfare conflict.
No, and no. In some cases, it gives the specific number of people who are killed and taken captive. It was... Okay, this is just a bad one. It's not rhetoric. It's not Middle East or Near East, ancient Near East trash talk. It's very specific in what it says, in what it describes. And on top of all of this, you would still have to be saying that the Bible is then not divinely inspired, right? This is another apologetic where it's taking the God out of the equation, which makes it make a lot more sense. But then you're taking God out of the Bible, making it just another another book, essentially. So you have to square this up with a divine command, a divine revelation from God, or a divine inspiration, divinely written. The Bible. You have to make that make sense with, okay, so is the Bible divinely written, but it was divinely written 400 years later to describe scenarios that didn't actually take place hundreds of years ago? What are you talking about? It gets very... There's too much too many problems with these apologetics to go over every single one of them point by point, because the apologetics themselves are so terrible that you would get I myself would get confused trying to keep track of all of the things that would have to make sense with each other, and the water just gets too muddy.
That
Let's keep
these
going.
descriptions, leave none that breathes, would be on par with saying how'd the basketball game go. Oh, we slaughtered them. That doesn't mean they're
Okay, yes.
wiping off blood from the basketball court.
No, it doesn't. When you say, okay, I've said that, I've heard this one before, and I've said this many times before, but here we are again. So, sorry. When you say, hey, when you're playing a sports ball game, okay, and you say, hey, we killed the other team last night, what you mean is that you beat them, probably by a large margin, 0 to 100, whatever. The score was it was not even close. We slaughtered those guys. We killed those guys. We really, whatever. We destroyed those guys. That means you beat them by a large margin, okay? That's when you're talking about sports ball. When you're talking about war, now what does this mean when you say we really slaughtered those guys? What that means is you fucking slaughtered those guys. That's what that means. You might say, okay, so with the sports ball analogy, with this analogy, what that means is you killed a much larger percentage of their people than they killed of yours. When you say we really destroyed them, that means you killed a lot of them. Now, if you say we completely annihilated them, does that mean you killed every single last one of them? Possibly not. It could just be trash talk, right? But it does mean that you slaughtered a lot of people. That's what that means. That's what that means. So this is another really, really terrible apologetic.
A good book on this is written by Paul Capan and Matthew Flanagan called
No.
Did God Really Command Genocide?
Okay. No.
And I think it puts forward a decent argument that the non-literal view of the passages makes sense of our understanding.
Again, so if it says we completely destroyed them, the literal sense would be that you completely destroyed them. The figurative sense would be that you slaughtered a large portion of them. Both of those are equally disgusting as a command from a divine being. So stop it. Stop it.
Another resource I'd recommend, though, would be Pope Benedict XVI's Apostolic Exhortation Verbum Domini. Mm-hmm. In there, he talks about the dark passages of Scripture, and the Catechism mentions this, how there are elements of Scripture that are imperfect and provisional, that are meant as temporary rules and directives for God's people until they can reach the fullness of what God wants to offer them in Christ. The prime example of that would be
He's literally falling asleep, and I don't blame him.
Divorce. God allowed in the law, Deuteronomy allows the evil of divorce to prevent.
It allows the evil of divorce. Okay, first off, divorce is not evil, so stop it. That's dumb. Don't be stupid with it. And you can't compare. God allows the evilness of divorce. Does he allow the evilness of lying? Does he allow the evilness of worshiping other gods? Does he allow the evilness of murder? Does he allow the evilness of whatever the other dumb commandments are? Does he allow those evilnesses? No, he says don't do it. Do not do it. But why he doesn't say this for, he doesn't follow his own rules with the do not murder clause. Apparently he can break them. So don't stop with he has to allow the evilness of divorce. Divorce isn't evil. Excuse me, marriage, divorce. I'm not getting into it. I'm not going to get into why divorce isn't evil. But there's certain things that God does not allow his people to do. One of them is murder. So why the genocides? There's my question.
Aquinas said it was to prevent the greater evil of wife murder. That was his belief. That God, you have hardened hearts. I'm going to give you an imperfect law so that you can follow.
It's not forever,
but it's not forever. And we do this the same today. Like, how could someone do that? Like, well, I might have to say, you know what? Abortion is legal in the case of rape, but it's illegal in other cases. Why did I give that law if I'm a legislator? Because I know.
Okay, you can. So, as a person who is very far left, you can imagine what my stances on abortion are. But here's the problem: we are imperfect people, and we create imperfect laws. Um, God is not. So you can't compare laws and rules, laws, regulations that humans might make, because humans are extremely flawed creatures, and laws have changed substantially throughout time, and we keep getting better and we keep regressing and progressing. It's a tidal wave of opinions and thoughts and ideas and arguments to be made. However, a God does not suffer from such flaws. So there's no reason why God would allow humans to do something that he thinks is evil. It's Jesus. Okay.
No, it's the only one
Let's
you
try to
guys will
finish this
follow.
video.
If I ban abortion in all cases, the law will just be ignored, or I'll be voted out.
But
of
isn't there a
office.
difference between allowing divorce and commanding genocide?
Okay, sure. And so the difference
Good question. That is a good question. I appreciate that.
here is that when you have things that are required based on certain historical contexts, once again, we would go back to that. God did not say that the Israelites could make a judgment for themselves about you can take human life whenever you feel like, in the sense of now it would be.
That's what he's saying. Trent Horn is absolutely stumbling on his words. That's the question he just asked. Yes, he's just reiterating the question. He doesn't allow Israel to fall to its own devices. Yeah, that would be the allowing divorce. But what about the command to do something?
Even worse, I'd say, to allow genocide, in the sense of you can end the life of any human being you feel is necessary, just like you can write a writ of divorce. In fact, God specifically commanded Israel to not go to war with other nations, to leave to not.
is his best defense right now is he's saying, well, God didn't command his people to commit all of the genocide, just some of it. He said don't genocide some people. So God's great. He didn't say genocide everybody, just some. I mean, I believe that's his argument right now.
Get into fight.
He doesn't have an argument. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's saying nothing. He's fumbling to come up with something desperately and quickly, and his face right now kind of says a lot of his thought process. Because I'm not going to rewind it, but if you were to rewind 10 seconds, listen to very, very, very carefully, listen to the words that he's actually said, and try to string together how he got to this last sentence of he didn't command his people to genocide all of the people. Nothing he said prior to this led to this, but here we are anyway.
Fights with Moab, the Moabites, for instance.
Yeah.
But here, God is restricting and exercising.
Wait, what? He did say to slaughter a lot of Moabites. Whether you can argue it was a genocide to slaughter all of them, probably not. But he did say do the killing of the Moabites by a lot.
Restricting and exercising his authority that he rightly has to take human life, if that is what he did, to exercise it in a very limited circumstance rather than giving some kind of a general command or an allowance. But I lean towards the view that it is that it's non-literal based on all the elements in the passages.
Okay.
Hold on.
Authority that he rightly has to take human life, if that is what he restricting and
what do you say about the Moabites?
To not go to war with other nations, to leave to not get into fights with Moab, the Moabites, for instance.
No, he did some Moabite fighting. Hold on. Hold on here. I know he did some Moabite. Hold on. Bear with me. Okay, I'm not going to waste any more time on this. I'm very confident that it wasn't a, go utterly destroy them type of situation, but I know that there was a few thousand killed. Didn't he send an army of like 10,000 soldiers or 100,000 soldiers to fight the Moabites? That's going to bother me. Do not harass the Moabites or provoke war. I will not give you any other land. Struck down. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. David also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death. Every third was allowed to live. So the Moabites became subject to David and brought him. Yeah, no, the Moabites were killed too. I don't know why he would say that.
But here, God is restricting and exercising his authority that he rightly has to take human life, if that is what he did, to exercise it in a very
So he does believe the earlier. That's his. Okay, so that's his argument. He just said that God has the right to take life. He gives it, he can take it, and that's disgusting. But even if true, why would you then follow this God who exercises his right to inflict unimaginable suffering, limitless suffering, really, upon a child, and then end its life? Even if he does have this right, why would you choose to worship, love, follow, donate, preach, proselytize said God who chose to exercise his right, his divine right to inflict suffering upon children? It's a little weird.
Limited circumstance rather than giving some kind of a general command or an allowance. But I lean towards the view that it is that it's non-literal based on all the elements in the passages.
Okay.
Hey,
hold on. So he said that it's not okay. I could have swore in the beginning of this video. Okay, we got to go back. Stand by. Bear with me.
Who's working through this?
He said
he's bloodthirsty.
I thought in the beginning he said he doesn't necessarily subscribe to the view that the Bible isn't literal, and then at the end he said these passages aren't literal. Am I wrong?
I want to have nothing to do with a God like that, and so how could you worship a God like that? And Christians have offered a variety of responses to this argument. I don't endorse every response present, but I think it's important for people, especially an atheist who is working through this, to be aware of the different responses. So on the one end, the extreme, or not extreme, I guess, one response might be that, this is just something that is a purely human device that represents the barbarism of ancient peoples and that was not inspired by God. God never did anything like this whatsoever. And so that's just a part of the Bible that we determine is not relevant today. And it was, it's an error within the Bible. And so it's something that, we don't accept everything, but that's just an error. That's one view. It's not a view that I would endorse, but those who say this, I would say.
Okay, so he did. That was just the Bible's a lie. Okay, I was wrong. My bad. I don't remember everything. All right, so what did we learn from this video? What did we take away from this video? There was nothing new or enlightening. That's all apologetics that I've heard before for genocide defense. In none of these responses did it make sense the omnibenevolence of a genocide commanding God, and that's something that it's a problem. It's an issue. If you don't believe that God is omnibenevolent, then this is not an issue for you. If you believe that God is fully capable of doing things that are not of a loving nature, then this isn't a problem for you. It's only a problem for the people who put forth a God who is all loving, the peak of love. God is love, agape love. This is a problem for you. And Trent Horn did not rectify this problem at all. What else did we learn? Recap of the video. What else did we learn? We learned that the Bible could be just kidding. It was just an LOL type situation where just the trash talk. It didn't actually happen, which is stupid. We went over that. I don't think we really learned anything, as we do with. That tends to be the case with Christian apologetics. We learn nothing, but it's fun to give counter apologetics. And that's what we do here at this channel. If you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe, but I am going to end the video now. Take care.